Greetings, class. So I want to take this time to go over one of the first labs in AWS Academy Architect Associate. It is on the command line interface for AWS, and we'll also cover the uh, sandbox in the AWS Academy. So let me share my screen. And as you can see, I'm logged into AWS Academy. And I'm going to switch over to student view so I see the view that you have. And please ignore the pink line outline around my screen. But this is similar to what you have. So if you go to modules, and then you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you will see an area called Sandbox. So click in there. And this is a full-blown AWS environment. It used to have every last application you could find in AWS, but they parsed it back. They pared it back quite a bit. And you can now use these applications here: Cloud9, Formation, CloudFront, Shell, Trail, CloudWatch DB, EC2, S3, and many, many, many more. So a couple things I want to point out first. The first thing we're going to do is start the lab, okay? Because this takes a while for it to spin up. So first thing you do when you come in the sandbox is click on that. Now, to get to the normal AWS console, there's an AWS button up here in the upper left. When that turns green, you can get the AWS console. But for the meantime, I want you to just use your browser function and do a find. So I'm using Firefox, so I'm going to do Control F. And I'm going to look for CLI. All right. And this is very important for this first lab, running CLI commands. So normally when you have your own AWS account, you can get your credentials, your access keys, your SSH keys through the AWS console to put into CLI. Since these accounts rotate all the time, so every time you open up the sandbox, you basically get a new temporary generated account. Well, we have to take the information after this spins up and then put it into our configuration file. Now, this is a little bit painful for me because I have my own AWS account that I use. So I have to do this, back and forth quite a bit. But no big deal. I can still get it to work. So I'm gonna let this finish starting up. I'm gonna pause my recording and come back when it's a little bit closer to being done. So 1 second, I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so one thing that it does after we've found the CLI piece here, Control Find CLI. If you go up here to AWS details, it will generate your information. So here's your AWS CLI. So you click on show. What you need to do is copy all of this. So copy. And then you have to put it into your AWS configuration file. Now, I know where that is for Windows. I am not sure where it is for Mac, but all you really need to do is go to Google and Google AWS CLI configuration file Mac, right? And you can find that. CLI and configure credentials and config. So I'm not a Mac user, but it looks like there's plenty of information on the internet. I did the same thing to figure this out for Windows. All right. And I basically found the Amazon config documentation. I posted this in the assignment itself, so you should have a link to this page. But going back to the sandbox environment, for Windows, if you go into your C drive and you go to users, and then you pick your current user. If you don't know which user you are, do a command prompt. When you open up a command prompt, it will tell you what your user you are. So be users brbro. So brbro is my user. So I'm going to go into my user, and then you have to look for hidden files. So you have to make sure that you were looking for hidden files. That's what the little dot is in front of everything. So under the .aws, right? And you can come up here and you can actually just manually put it into. So C:\user, your username, \aws. And then in the config file, I'm going to open that up with Notepad. Oh, excuse me. I apologize. In the credentials file. Because these are credentials. This is where you paste that information. So I'm going to delete all this. All right. And paste what I got from the AWS Sandbox. There you go. And once that's in there, I'm just going to hit File Save, click File, and then Save. And close that. All right, and now we are off to the races. So we have our creds for AWS CLI. All right, so I have already installed the AWS CLI. So if you probably had a lab in Foundations, AWS Foundations, which shows you how to do that. If not, if you need to install CLI, the CLI app, if you go to, let me minimize this. There's another, I believe there's a link in there as well. So if you go to Google, install AWS CLI, Mac, Windows, Linux. I'm going to do Windows because that's what I'm doing. And it's the first Amazon link that comes up here. I know I have this in there, but and it tells you how to do it for each one. So it'll tell you how to do the install and update. Okay, it'll tell you where to grab the MSI file. You install that. All right, it's pretty straightforward. It's like installing any type of application or game or program on your computer for Windows. Okay, so once that's all done, go back here to the terminal. And I don't need to use the terminal, although I could. But since I've copied these credentials in here and I've already installed AWS, I have AWS. I can do AWS commands from my command shell. All right. So I'm just going to go here to the assignment for the week. So modules. I have all this outlined in the assignment. So there's the assignment, AWS CLI. All right, and this has been updated. So all I need to do here is pretty much follow it along step by step. And you can look at page 17 in your textbook. It kind of goes over this a little bit too. But basically what I'm going to do is I do AWS S3. I'm going to make a bucket. MB is for make bucket. And then S3 : whack whack. And then the bucket name. So the bucket name has to be unique. It can only be lowercase. Do not use any uppercase characters. It follows the same rules as if you were making it in the console, the AWS console. So I'm just going to call this BRO 1 2 3 4 5 9 8 7 6. Hit enter. All right, and it made my bucket. So then I can, on page 17, if you look there, It gives a couple other commands that you can do to test everything, I believe. And so you do AWS S3 LS, list your buckets. Yeah, there's my bucket. All right, cool, cool. All right, so the next thing you have to do is transfer a file to your bucket. So I have a little log file on my root directory. So, and this can be any file. Log files are good. So you can pull a log file from, say, your um, Steam library, if you play games on Steam, or if you pull a log file from Windows. This will be gone in 3 hours anyway, so you don't have to worry about anybody stealing it or nabbing it or anything else. So I have a log file. So it's just whack whack log is what the because it will read my C directory. But you put your path to that file that you want to upload in the command, and the command, oh, it's right here. That's going to be AWS S3. So I'm going to use the S3 command. I'm going to copy and then whack log dot text, because that's the full name of my file with the extension. Okay. And then I'm going to do a space S3 colon // and then my bucket name, which I just made. So it was BRBROWN 1 2 3 4 5 9 8 7 6. Okay. And if I hit enter, it'll take a second, and it'll tell me I failed out. An error occurred. No such bucket. Okay, I must have messed up the bucket name. Oh, yeah. So if you mess up your bucket name, because I put Brown instead of BRO, BRBRO, because that's my username. And then 1 2 3 4 5 9 8 7 6. So syntax error on my behalf. Let's try it that way, and we'll see that it is uploading it. So this is like a 23 meg file, 25 meg file. So it'll take a second or two. There it goes, and it's done. So now if I do that AWS S3 LS, it's just going to show me my bucket, but there's other commands that you can use to look inside the bucket further. I'm not going to go into that. You can play around with that if you like. But if I go back to the console, right? If I go to the AWS console, click here. I ask you for uh-oh. Let me log out here. Okay, that's probably because I was in there before. Oops. So now let me try it again. This will work, guys. Yeah. I was just logged in previously in a previous session, so that's why it gave me that error. So so ever asked you log out, and then log back in. If you go to services, and you will find S3 around here somewhere. If you go to all services, you can find it via alphabetically. Obviously, it's showing up in mine because I used it recently, but it's right there at the top of S if I look at all services. And there's my bucket. Okay, and there's my file. Cool. So what you have to do from there is just finish things up with the exercises. So screenshot the CLI running. All right, so once you have the CLI, you do a couple of CLI commands, show me that you ran those. Perfect. Screenshot the S3 bucket you created in the graphical UI. All right, so that was right there. Screenshot you completing the commands in the exercise. So just take a screenshot of the commands that you ran in your command prompt. All right. And then write a quick little one paragrapher. Please describe your screenshots. So give a one sentence of your screenshots, what they are, and then briefly explain in your own words the usefulness of using the AWS CLI. So what can you use this for? Might do a little bit of research on that, a couple Google searches. What are some good common time savers, etc., of using AWS CLI in one paragraph or less? So please provide that. And then on the next page, once you have all that together in a Word doc, you upload it here, you're done. So that's assignment number 1 here. CLI, it can be a little cumbersome if you're not used to using the sandbox. Also went over the sandbox. So good luck, happy computing, happy cloud computing. And this is Dr. Brown signing off.